2023 City Council regular meeting to order. City Clerk Ben Lane, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor David Ortega.
Present.
Vice Mayor Tom Durham.
Here.
Council members Tammy Caputi.
Here.
Barry Graham.
Here.
Betty Janik.
Here.
Kathy Littlefield.
Here.
And Solange Whitehead.
Here.
City Manager Jim Thompson.
Here.
City Attorney Sherry Scott.
Here.
City Treasurer Sonia Andrews.
Here.
Acting City Auditor Leigh Clough.
Here.
And the clerk is present. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. We have Scottsdale Police Officer, actually Sergeant Sean Ryan, and Detective Dustin Patrick. We also have firefighter L.A. Dedman here, should anyone need assistance. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll call on Councilwoman Kathy Littlefield. So let's begin, and Happy New Year to everyone. You know, Friday there was an incident which involved our elite police officers serving an arrest warrant. It occurred in adjoining jurisdiction, and they were very valiant in carrying out their duty. So we do want to commend the police force. And we have already sent our thanks to the other agencies that were involved as that incident came to conclusion. So we don't often hear the valor that's exhibited by our Scottsdale police, but when we do, be assured that we will recognize it, and we thank you for your service. I would also like to take a moment in recognition of a former city councilman, Renee Wendell. He passed away on December 24th. Renee was very active in our community, served as city councilman, was a very generous businessman, and he is greatly remembered among us and will be missed. I would say years ago when I took many Charo rides, I do remember Renee very well. We were galloping along and my hat flew off and I had to make a turn, and I came back and Renee was there because I figured I'd have to dismount, and he just, without dismounting, swiftly pulled that hat right off the ground. And he said, "Here you go." That's the kind of a gentleman cowboy Renee Wendell is. With that, we also keep the people of Ukraine in the forefront of our thoughts as they fight for democracy and for their freedom. So at this point, I will ask that we pause in silence. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to the manager's report. So I will call on City Manager Jim Thompson to provide the City Manager's report. Hi, Jim.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. We have a short video for you this evening.
Hi, I'm Public Affairs Specialist Stephanie Hirata with 5 fast things happening around the city you need to know. Starting us off at number 5, 'tis the season to recycle your Christmas tree. Recycle your Christmas tree at these drop-off locations through January 16th. Yellow collection bins will be available at the following city parks. Untreated real Christmas trees or unwired wreaths will be made into compost and save landfill space. We don't accept artificial trees, stands, ornaments, light, or storage bags. Single-family home residents can place Christmas trees in their green waste pile, separated from bulk trash, for collection on their scheduled brush bulk service week. You can find your brush pick schedule at scottsdaleaz.gov and search solid waste. Coming in at number 4, Scottsdale adopts mandatory green building requirements. The Scottsdale City Council recently adopted the 2021 edition of the International Energy Conservation Code and the International Green Construction Code as mandatory codes. It's an innovative step toward long-term sustainability. Scottsdale is the first city in the state and one of only a few nationwide to implement such guidelines. The change helps Scottsdale clarify code provisions, protect natural resources, and account for new technologies. It's also expected to cut 20% of each new building's water use and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 10%. New Scottsdale commercial developments will be required to follow the city's Green Building Code standards set to ensure environmental practices in the building industry. Next up at number 3, Scottsdale's biannual community survey is underway. Randomly selected Scottsdale households are asked to participate in a survey to measure their views on the community, city programs, and services. The city will use the feedback to prioritize initiatives, services, and programs in the future. Selecting a group of Scottsdale households at random assures that the results are representative of the community within a known margin of error. Once the feedback period for the 5,500 randomly selected households concludes, an online version of the survey will be opened for all city residents to provide their feedback. Survey results will be available in the spring of 2023. More information and past survey results are available at scottsdaleaz.gov and search Community Survey. At number 2, Scottsdale's facility team boosted the city's water conservation efforts in 2022. From February to November, they saved nearly 900,000 gallons of water by installing 6 communicating cooling tower controllers at city buildings. The goal was to reduce water usage and quickly identify mechanical failures where controllers are installed. One more installation will be completed, leading to a water savings forecast of roughly 1.3 million gallons in 2023. To learn how you can help save water, visit scottsdaleaz.gov and search water. Wrapping things up at number 1, get the scoop on Scottsdale Super Season. The city has partnered with Experience Scottsdale to promote Scottsdale Super Season signature events that take place in Scottsdale through March, including Western Week, the WM Phoenix Open, Super Bowl associated activities, and spring training. Get details at scottsdalesuperseason.com. And that's Scottsdale's Fast 5 for January. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Proceeding with our posted agenda. During tonight's meeting, the council may make a motion to recess into executive session to obtain legal advice on any applicable item on the agenda. If authorized by the council, the executive session will be held immediately and will not be open to the public. The public meeting will resume following the executive session. Again, that's information in case that is requested. Moving on, per our council rules of procedure, citizens attending city council meetings shall observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to members of the council and city staff. Unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from the audience, such as applause, stamping of feet, whistles, boos, yells, and/or other demonstrations shall not be permitted. Violations of these rules could result in removal from the meeting by security staff. So this allows us, maintaining these rules allows the meeting to run smoothly. Next, we will go to public comment. Public comment is an opportunity which is posted. The public comment is reserved for Scottsdale residents, Scottsdale business owners and/or Scottsdale property owners to comment on non-agendized items that are within the council's jurisdiction. Advocacy for or against a candidate or a ballot measure during the council meeting is not allowed pursuant to state law and is therefore not deemed to be within the council's jurisdiction. No official action can be taken on public comment items, and speakers are limited to 3 minutes to address the council. We have 4 speakers who have filled out their information, and as I'll call 2 at a time, we'll begin with Linda Milhaven and then Cody Ream.
Good evening. My name is Linda Milhaven. I reside on Belgian Trail in Scottsdale. And first, I'd like to congratulate returning council members Littlefield and Whitehead and the new council member Graham. Congratulations. On November 21st, a petition was presented to the City Council signed by 135 residents requesting that the city negotiate an agreement with EPCOR, which is one of the largest water providers in Arizona, to provide water to our neighbors in the Rio Verde foothills area of the county. The city manager responded, and his response needs some clarification. The proposal from EPCOR is a short-term solution in which EPCOR would provide all of the water and reimburse Scottsdale with some profit for all expenses relating to treating and transporting the water. No Scottsdale water would be used, and there would be no cost to Scottsdale residents. The proposal was for an interim solution while EPCOR builds the infrastructure to serve the Rio Verde foothills. The city manager's response combined the discussion of the short and long-term solutions and failed to mention that EPCOR presented the Arizona Corporation Commission with 4 potential long-term solutions, 2 of which do not involve Scottsdale. The response suggests that entering a short-term agreement may obligate Scottsdale to a long-term commitment when it does not. Scottsdale's role, if any, in the short and long-term solutions are separate decisions. It has been implied that if Scottsdale assists Rio Verde foothills, that it would support unfettered, unlimited, and unregulated future development. However, EPCOR's application with the Arizona Corporation Commission limits service only to homes built before January of 2024. So an agreement with EPCOR would not support future development in the county. The response also compares the current proposal with a situation in New River, where Phoenix discontinued service to the New River area of the county. However, it does not share the fact that Phoenix extended their deadline several times in order to provide EPCOR with the time they needed to negotiate an agreement with Anthem. If we were to follow this example, we would cooperate with EPCOR while they seek alternative solutions and/or enter an agreement with EPCOR as Anthem did. As of the first of the year, the City of Scottsdale has discontinued serving the residents of the Rio Verde foothills area. Most residents topped off their tanks before the end of the year, but within a month or 2, they will not have a reliable source of water and their taps will run dry. It is not too late to do the right thing. I know that the residents of Scottsdale are good people and would want to help their neighbors, especially when they learn that we can help without using any of our own water and without costing them any money. Please do the right thing and negotiate with EPCOR to protect the residents of Scottsdale and our neighbors in the Rio Verde foothills. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Cody Ream and Louise Lamb, followed by Sean Ream. Please state your address and of residence. Thank you.
Mayor Ortega, council members, thank you for your time. My address is outside of the city of Scottsdale, but my family owns a business and operates a business within the city of Scottsdale in which I am a member of that business. Thank you. The business is Pacific Sheet Metal, and the address is 7360 East Acoma Drive, Suite 9, Scottsdale, Arizona, 85260. Again, my name is Cody Ream. For the past 10 years, my family has owned and operated a small business located here in the city of Scottsdale. It's a sheet metal business, and we put metal roofs on homes as well. We do all of our daily spending and shopping here in Scottsdale. My wife and I send our kids to school here. When we bought our first new car, we chose to buy it in Scottsdale so that the taxes and money spent would remain in our local economy. When we lived in Scottsdale in November of 2020, my wife and I cast our votes for Mayor Ortega. We are committed to Scottsdale. Scottsdale is our home, and we feel we are a part of this special community. We just happen to live in the Rio Verde foothills. So today I come to you, the council of this amazing city, and beg for your help. Your neighbors need your help. Within a matter of days, our water tanks at our homes will be dry. But this is avoidable. It's completely avoidable. We have water in the CAP. We just need Scottsdale to process that water. And this council has the power to allow that to happen. Any water that is currently available is almost 6 times higher than it was 2 weeks ago, making it very unattainable financially for my family of 6 to get running water in the taps of our home. My ask is simple. Per the rules of this council, I ask that the issue your neighbors in Rio Verde foothills are facing be placed on the agenda of the next council meeting. I ask that an emergency meeting be scheduled because time is not on our side, and the health and well-being of nearly 1,000 households is on the line. This is not weeks or months, this is days. We need your help, and we're begging for your help. We are here. We are here. This is an amazing feat for my community to do. Close to 50, maybe 60 people here. We are asking for your help with everything in us, and you guys are the only power that can help us. Thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you serving this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Louise Lamb and Sean Ream.
Mayor, City Council members, I am Louise Lamb, 7706 East Vista Drive. On November 8th of last year, a petition of 702 signatures was presented to the City Council to reinstate the downtown trolley during the winter months, especially Super Bowl week. Not only as a Scottsdale resident, but as a Scottsdale ambassador, I would appreciate being told the status of that petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sean Ream. Sean Ream. Sorry.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your service, and not really good at this. So, as Cody said, I'm Cody's dad. I own a small metal roofing company here in Scottsdale, Arizona, at 7360 East Tacoma. We have a small fabrication shop right by the air park there. We do multiple homes in Paradise Valley and the Scottsdale area. My grandkids all go to school here. We shop here. Scottsdale is our town that we use. So I just want to come here today just to make it clear on what's going on. There's a lot of back and forth and confusion and scare tactics that happened a while back that most of it's been resolved. EPCOR has stepped up and is willing to dump water into your pipes, to the city of Scottsdale's pipes, to transport it to a feasible location that we've already been using for years and years to buy us some time. These people are going to run out of water out there soon, and it's going to be some chaos. And we're just asking you guys to do what's right, and please help us. Help your neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ream. I'm looking, that's the end of public comment. Accordingly, I will close public comment. Next, we'll move on to the agenda items for the minutes. I would like to have a motion to approve the regular meeting and work-study session minutes of November 14th, 2022, special meeting minutes of November 21st, 2022, executive session minutes of November 21st, 2022, regular meeting and work study session minutes of November 21st, 2022, special meeting minutes of November 28th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the regular meeting and work study session minutes of November 14, 2022, special meeting minutes of November 21, 2022, executive session minutes of November 21, 2022, regular meeting and work study session minutes of November 21, 2022, special meeting minutes of November 28, 2022.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Mayor, may I make a point of order?
Yes.
May I request that I abstain from voting on that?
Yes.
Because I was in absentia for
That's
those
correct.
meetings?
Yes.
Thank you.
So he did not attend those meetings, and of course, others have. So with that.
Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yes, it is.
City Attorney,
Yes, it
okay.
is.
Thank you.
And so please record your vote. Thank you. It's 6-0. Next, we will move on to our consent agenda items. They are agendized as item 1 through 23. I have had a request to pull item number 21 relating to a threshold for expenses procurement within the city. So at this point, I'll explain that the consent agenda involves items which are duly posted and all the information is available. Generally, they have approvals and complete information. However, we do allow for the public to comment on any of those items which remain on consent agenda. I don't see any request, well, except for item 21. So we will be putting item 21 on the regular agenda. And so at this point, if there's no other questions from council, I would entertain a motion to on the consent agenda items 1 through 23.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda items 1 through 23 with the exception of item 21.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote. Thank you. That's unanimous. With that, we will move on to item number 21 and request a full presentation. This relates to the procurement solicitation threshold, and our treasurer will make the presentation. Hello, Sonia.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. This item is to request the increase for the thresholds for vendor bids and proposals, specifically the threshold for formal solicitation. So this is what this proposal is about. This proposal is not changing any purchasing controls. That means all the requirements and approvals needed for purchasing items, budget requirements, and council approval requirements does not change. And I will go into each of these a little bit more. Next slide, please. So the reason we are proposing this is because of the benefits that we believe that the city will gain from increasing the threshold for formal solicitation. We would eliminate delays for smaller dollar items that don't warrant a formal solicitation process. And again, I will go over that a little bit more, and provide better customer service. We would also increase vendor participation and be able to receive more bids and proposals on these items. Next slide. So currently, this chart, I'll walk you through it. Currently, we have 4 different types of solicitation for purchasing commodities, services. The first one is a direct select option, and currently that limit is under $10,000. And direct select means that the departments, if it's under $10,000 for a commodity or service, they can select whichever vendor that they prefer and just directly purchase the item. The next level is called what we call quick quotes. They're for small, one-time purchases of commodities and services. Right now, our threshold is $10,000 to $25,000, and what that requires is at least 3 quotes from 3 different vendors. The next level is what we consider an informal proposal, and these are for renewable term contracts of, again, commodities and services. They're not one-time items. Right now, the threshold is, again, $10,000 to $25,000, and the informal proposal is publicly posted, usually for about 14 days. It's an informal invitation for vendors, any vendor, to bid and provide a proposal. The proposal is informal. It could be 1 to 12 pages for a vendor to submit. And then the final level is called a formal solicitation. And right now, our level is over $25,000. That is what we're proposing to change to over $100,000. And that formal solicitation process requires a public posting of our request for proposal for up to 30 days. The formal invitation to bid typically requires a vendor to put together upwards of 50 pages of a document to propose, to respond to the proposal, sealed bids. It's a lengthy process. So an example would be right now, let's say we needed a 40,000 generator because something is not working at one of our community facilities. It's a 40,000 generator, but it requires a formal solicitation process. So just posting the request for proposal for 30 days. We're waiting for 30 days just on that, let alone waiting for the proposals to come in, evaluating the proposals. So it could be an extended period of time before we can replace the equipment in order to get it up and running for our customers. The other reason is also vendors are hesitant to submit and spend so much time putting a 50-page document together for some of these smaller items. So our proposal is to increase the formal solicitation limit from $25,000 to $100,000 because there are a lot of smaller items that we need for our facilities, services, for our operations that really don't warrant a full formal solicitation. They will still be required under the new thresholds to provide informal proposals. They will still be required to provide quick quotes. Now, this proposal that's in front of the council is relating to the formal solicitation. The other types of purchasing solicitation, the direct select option, the quick quotes, and informal, we can increase those limits through our administrative regulation process. So hopefully that explains what this request is about. Next slide. The other thing I wanted to make sure we understand is this proposal does not change our purchasing controls. We have purchasing controls contained in our procurement code and our administrative regulations. And those requirements of what is required in order to buy something, whether it's a commodity or a service, do not change. So for example, our approval levels for purchasing controls. Right now, anything up to $5,000 requires a supervisor or manager approval. That does not change. Anything from $5,000 to $50,000 requires a manager or director approval, and anything $50,000 and over requires a director or higher level approval in order to procure. That does not change. Currently, our procurement code also requires council to approve any formal contracts over $100,000 for construction and professional services. That also does not change. So I just wanted to make it clear that this is purely changing the limit for the formal solicitation process from $25,000 to $100,000 to allow for small items that really don't warrant a full-blown, long process, but it still requires all these purchasing controls and approvals that are in place already. And hopefully, by doing so, we eliminate delays, improve customer service, and also allow more vendors to propose for some of these smaller items.
Thank you very much. And let me call on Councilman Graham, if you had any comments.
Oh, Mayor, were there public comment requests?
Let's see. There is. There's, I believe, Mr. Washington, if he's here. Ah, there he is. Good. Please come forward, state your place of residence, and you know the drill.
It's been so long, I may have forgotten. I'm John Washington. I live just down the street in the first planned neighborhood in Scottsdale, Peaceful Valley. I see this agenda item as an opportunity to review the procurement code in its entirety. I have said for years that I didn't think it was working very well. And so on that note, I would also like to say that I see your role primarily as stewards of sustainable management of taxpayer money and our quality of life, and they're interrelated. And I think this agenda item goes right to that. As I read the agenda item, I'm concerned that there's really not a lot here. No offense to staff, but to me, it's a lot of word salad. Established thresholds are no longer compatible with contemporary market conditions. Market conditions is used 3 times in this one page. Thresholds competing with neighboring municipalities. I think we should be better than our neighboring municipalities. I don't think we should try to match them in terms of our stewardship of taxpayer dollars. In industry standards, I have no idea what that means, unless it means developer standards or bidder standards, because it's not city standards and shouldn't be our standard, I don't think. I'd also like to point out, I'm not going to comment on the agenda item other than to say that this $100,000 threshold, there's an item on your agenda that you just approved that got no discussion whatsoever for $98,500. It's underneath that threshold, and it wouldn't have even been on the consent agenda if this policy is allowed to change. I think that's a mistake, and I think it's a mistake for transparency. That's an important part, I believe, of the residents and the taxpayers' confidence in you and in staff, that at least the information is put out there and we can see it. It's bad enough to try and track down the information looking for it on an agenda item. And if it's not on the council agendas, you're not going to find it on the website. I've probably been through the website looking for stuff more than any single person that doesn't work for the city, and it has become practically impossible. I'd ask you to reconsider this agenda item and also use it as an opportunity to review the entire procurement code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Let me look to the city manager on additional comment or information. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Just a couple additional items, and just want to share a perspective from my office. But back in 2014, in December of 2014, the city auditor performed an audit that recommended raising these thresholds. And in that audit, it was specific in nature of why to raise these thresholds. One, the cost of the amount of staff time and delivery of service and responsiveness to the citizens was declining because the cost of services were rising. And it takes probably 3 to 5 months to draft the bid specs, review the bid specs, get them out, wait the 30 days to receive them back, go through the selection process. So this was back in 2014. It was recommended they be moved up. At that time, that item was not brought forward. At that point, it was recommended it goes to a minimum of 50. And then because of the changes that have occurred, in particular in the economy, that's why we sat with the 100,000, which would be consistent with other cities of similar size. Part of this as well is we're starting to see more where we're doing business with less smaller entities. What I mean by that is a sole proprietor or smaller businesses don't have the resources to go through a bid process in a very large document. Most of our bids are quite substantial in nature and volume and responsiveness to bid on something of that volume. So we've really have seen less and less of the smaller businesses, especially in the community, being having the resources to put forth to respond to bid specs. And so that's another reason why, and it was also noted back in 2014 that that was a trend, but it's even become more with the apparent inflation and other things we're seeing in the marketplace. Also for me, it's responsiveness. Things come up on a regular basis in our operations, and we may need to be a little bit more nimble to respond. And when you hit that 25,000, you have to bid out. And right now, we would call and get 3 quotes. If we changed this evening, we would still get 3 quotes. But our responsiveness now is delayed by 3 to 5 months, depending on the time it takes to draft it and respond to things of minor nature in today's world because of the volume costs. We haven't addressed this policy in years, and that's why we're here this evening. And so I thought I would share my perspective, at least, of some of those additional things that I think are very important to the community. We enjoy having numerous amounts of small businesses in the community, and they're getting to the point that it's really challenging for them as their cost to deliver a service has now exceeded the $25,000 just for smaller things. Historically, we may have been able to shop with them. We no longer can. Because they're not submitting bids because they don't have the resources to do so. So we're just trying to get up with the times and what we've seen for inflationary matters, but also allow us to be more responsive to our constituents when the issues present themselves, and we then have to go through a very long, drawn-out process to get to the end. There's a couple other things that to note in this as well. We can look to other agencies that bid matters out and use their bid specs when we're in somewhat a hurry, but that's not always going to be the same. So a municipality of smaller size or otherwise may not be awarded of the same amount as us, but to avoid waiting 5 months, we go out and we use another bid that was followed through Title 34 and others, maybe other communities that have met the public requirements for that posting. We believe that's not in their best interest either at times, and so that's why we, again, are in this situation this evening. So with that all said, that's why from my office we also support these changes, so noted. And here to answer any questions council may have as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank City Manager Thompson and City Treasurer Andrews for their explanation, and also Councilman Graham for pulling this agenda item. I think a lot of times, certainly we on council and the public sees an agenda item like that, and there's, could be reams of paper that describe how we got to this agenda item that aren't included. But at the end of the day, I really appreciate the explanations. What we're trying to do as a city government is be incredibly transparent, and we've done that. Under this city manager and the city treasurer, we've taken a lot of steps that have increased the transparency, increased the reporting, and made sure council and the public are more aware of costs and decisions that we're making. I do want to ask the city treasurer on the, I appreciate the explanation, but on the change, will there be quarterly reports to council that are available to the public on all of these awarded contracts and the bids?
Mayor, Councilwoman Whitehead. Yes, we can provide a quarterly report along with our quarterly financials that we provide to you.
Okay, so I think that this change, again, people, and that's a good thing, people are wary of their government, but what this change does is it does not impact transparency, it does not impact oversight, it does significantly reduce red tape, it keeps the city nimble and flexible and timely. When we need a generator, we need a generator. It benefits our small, often local businesses. It enables those businesses to go after these smaller contracts, and it enables us to get the best price. Because if a company has to put together a 50-page bid, we're not going to get the best price. So with that, I fully support the recommendation from both the city treasurer and the city manager, and I motion to adopt item 21, the Procurement Code Amendment, and request that we adopt ordinance number 4582, amending Scottsdale Revised Code, Chapter 2, Article 4, Division 4, amending the purchasing thresholds with existing regulation, rules and procedures, and request quarterly reports.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We have additional discussion. We have Councilwoman Janik, Councilmember Graham, and then Councilmember Littlefield. Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mayor. While I agree that we need to have less red tape when people go through the application process, and I agree that it needs to be a speedier process, which it will be with less red tape. On the other hand, when I see an increase for formal solicitation from over 25,000 to over 100,000, I question it. That's a very big jump. It's a big jump all at once, and I'm inclined not to approve it until we do a better examination of all the different aspects that are involved in this. So I, for one, will not be supporting it this evening.
Okay, Councilmember Graham, and then Councilwoman Littlefield.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my first meeting here, my intention wasn't to pull something from the council and make too big of a splash, to pull something from consent, I should say. Yes. But I saw an item on there, and I felt like it deserved a little extra scrutiny. I want to remind this council that our oversight and approval of spending is one of the most powerful controls that we have to protect residents. And so I truly appreciated Sonia's presentation. I thought it was informative. But I tend to disagree when she says that this doesn't change internal controls, because the definition of an internal control is a mechanism to detect or prevent something you don't want to happen. And so when items come before us on the consent agenda and they are reviewed by the City Council, that is a form of control. And this is a change to that. So I would respectfully disagree with that premise. I'd also respectfully disagree with the statement of what's warranted between increasing or decreasing. What's warranted is a very subjective term. We can all decide, we may all decide that different levels are warranted. So it is subjective. The public speaker, he mentioned that we would have not had a chance at reviewing something and scrutinizing something on the consent agenda tonight if these new standards had been established. So I think this is about internal controls, and during my preparation for this meeting, I spoke to many public and municipal experts, and most of them said that this was not a step in the direction of transparency. I asked for some additional information from the Treasurer's office, and she promptly provided that, and we saw in fiscal 22 alone that over half of the contracts that were awarded were between the size of 25,000 and 100,000, 62% approximately. So those were on consent agenda. Are we going to be pulling all these items, these contracts and awards off of consent? Probably not. We're going to usher them through. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I counted 62%, Sonia, and that wasn't spending, but that was awards in fiscal 22. So it would have been July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 22. There's value, I think, in letting citizens see contracts, and they would lose the ability to see them as easily. And so I do think it chips away a little bit at this body's oversight function, our ability to scrutinize projects that come before us, because it's going to take an extra step to see what's going on there. We also asked for comparative cities, and we noted that Mesa, which has double the population of Scottsdale, their threshold is $25,000. Anything above that goes to the City Council. So they say that is a good number for them. So this, to me, I kind of agreed with those who I spoke with, was in a step away from transparency. Like I said, this council, one of the ways we protect residents is that we have oversight and approval of contracts. So I'd like to make an alternate motion, if I may, Mayor, I do think some modest increase is probably okay. We've seen a lot of inflationary pressure on the monetary supply, and we've seen the price of, you look at your grocery bill and you're in shock. We all know the prices are up. And so I would respectfully make an alternate motion to increase the threshold to $50,000, but not the full $100,000. Thank you.
I second that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a request to speak from City Treasurer, and any additional information is appreciated.
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Graham, I just wanted to clarify for you and for the audience that this proposal does not change what goes to council, and I wanted to have Robert Sheppy, our purchasing director, explain currently what goes to council, and that will remain the same with this proposal.
Mayor, Council, Councilmember Graham, I just wanted to clarify that in regards to determining what contracts go to council for approval and what do not, it's covered in the Procurement Code under Section 2-201, and it specifically states all contracts over the formal limit that are professional services and construction related. And so the statistics that were provided earlier don't clearly represent what will and will not go to council. They simply represent the contracts over the dollar thresholds that were recommended.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? I am third in line here, so we will, because there's an alternate motion, does someone want to speak to the alternate motion before we vote on the alternate motion? I would say that I see Councilwoman Littlefield and then Vice Mayor. So their names came up before the alternate motion. That's the reason why I'm trying to clarify that. Councilwoman Littlefield, do you want to speak to the original and then maybe the alternate, whichever, because...
Yeah, I'd like to say a few things here. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes.
First of all, I don't care what other cities are doing. This is Scottsdale. I'm worried about Scottsdale and Scottsdale citizens, and that's what I care about. So what other cities are doing, if they're happy with it, God bless them, good luck, have fun. I'm worried about Scottsdale, and that's what I want to see. The money that we spend on these small contracts, that add up to quite a bit of money. If you add them all together, you're talking a bunch. You're not talking 25,000. You're talking millions. And this is citizen money. This doesn't belong to some pie-in-the-sky organization called the City of Scottsdale. This is citizen taxpayer money that we are spending, and we need to be accountable for that money. Part of the way that we are accountable is to make it public so that citizens can look at our agenda and say, oh, look at that, they're spending this much money on this contract and this much money on this. It doesn't add up to a lot maybe when you're looking at one or two contracts, but they have the right to see it. And if you just put it on the website or in a treasurer's report, they're not going to see it. So we're actually, in effect, denying them the right to see where we're spending all of this money. You said there, how many contracts of how much money is involved here? It's a lot, and it's yours. So I have a concern whenever we negate, reduce, or not deliver information to our citizens on where that money is going and how it's being spent, that we're doing right now, and that they expect to see. I don't think we've ever had anybody come up here and say, I don't like that $25,000 contract that you're showing that you're going to approve tonight on consent. Nobody does that, but at least they can look at it and they can see where the money is going. And they can say, oh, okay, we're going to spend this much money on the pool cleaning services. Fine. That's their right to see that. And it's then their right to complain if they wish to. But they have the right, first of all, to see it. We are their stewards of their money, and we owe it to our citizens to be open and honest about where that money goes. This gives the citizens the opportunity to know where it's going to be spent and on what is the benefit to them. Staff is often able, if they call staff and say, hey, you know, what are you doing about the pool cleaning services? They'll answer the questions, and they can find out. But it's not as clear and as easy to do when they can see the contracts and the money that's going on. It's a cost to deliver the services to the city that we owe to our citizens who provide the money. That's where we get our funding for all of this. Mesa raised their minimum from 25 to 50 as an alternative. Well, that's fine. That's good for Mesa. But we're not Mesa. So I'm not sure I really want to do that. I want to keep all of these kinds of things as open as possible to the review and study of the people who put that money in the pot in the first place. So I am not in support of the original agreement. I think that it is way too small, and I think, way too large a change. I guess I could go along with 50,000. I'm not real happy with it, but at least it puts a limit, and it does account for some inflationary factors. But in any case, I would want these contracts to be available for the citizens to review, even if it's not on consent, if it's somewhere where they can easily see and get into the details, the nitty-gritty, if they want to, of what this stuff is. So that's kind of where I stand on this. I can't agree with the original. I probably could go with the 50, but I certainly would not want it any more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Durham?
Thank you, Mayor. I thought I understood the purchasing director to say that there'd be no change in reporting, that all of these contracts would still come before us on the consent agenda, right? So so there'd be no change in what's reported to the public. The second question I had was, can you give us sort of a ballpark estimate of how many contracts would fall into this area between 50 and 100,000?
Mayor, Councilmember Durham, currently there are 213, for the fiscal year 2022, we had 213 solicitations that used the formal process because they were over $25,000. If we make this change, oh, and by the way, I wanted to make sure you understand that the 213 solicitations total $74.6 million for fiscal year 2022. If we make this change, that number would drop to 82, but the value of those contracts would only drop by $2 million. So $72.1 million would still be under the formal solicitation requirement versus $74.6 million. Now, I wanted to also reemphasize that Councilmember Durham is correct. This change is only changing the formal solicitation threshold required of the vendor. It does not change what is brought to council. It does not change what is on the consent agenda. It does not change what council has to approve. It does not change all the reporting that we are required to do and all the information, all the details that is available to the public. It does not change any of that. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I think it does. Thank you.
Okay, so everything involves level of service. And whenever we get an email that says, gee, this incident occurred in this alley and it requires quick action, we all receive that email. And if the power goes off at the senior center or Paiute or wherever, we expect results. And in terms of saying, well, my answer to you is it's going to go under procurement because it's $30,000 and we're going to have to wait 5 or 6 months on something that we're already going to get. We're going to get 3 bids, quick response bids, and we're going to be able to be agile and not say we're the federal government on procurement, then that's important. every request that comes through, whether, and you saw what happened with the monsoons, right? A part of Westworld's road got washed out. Where a lot of bid items are landing is, as I said, over $100,000. The majority of them, we need that kind of an action, and that's already the threshold. That's a practical expense that I can answer a constituent or a business and say, oh, those major items are taken care of, and the bulk of them are in those larger categories. The other thing that I have to point out is that for 50 years straight, Scottsdale, our financial services, have received the Award of Excellence. And that is not easy because we've had ups and downs in the economy and so forth. So what that means is that we were able to respond in a manner that certainly meets or exceeds any standards. There's no scandal going on or non-disclosure. We've been audited over and over again, and we perform at a very high level. I am concerned with people in the with contractors trying to respond in a volatile market for labor and so forth and projecting, well, in 5 months, my labor cost is going to be this, rather than being able to give a quick and responsive bid. It affects the cost to our taxpayers. It's not just slow pay, it's a slow deal to get that rolling. Also, there's in the market certain contractors that are available that may not be available in 3 months. So there's going to be a projection and so forth. So as I see it, in order to be a responsive mayor and our council, we want to be agile. There's always a file open on everything. And I say that because there's a phone call, there's an email, someone will say, I'm too busy, contractor A, B, and C. And the results are that we still can't provide the need to the problem or the constituent, right? If certain lights get knocked over by an accident, we need to replace some things. Well, we can respond quicker. That's the marketplace. That's that term that's used. Speaking as an architect, projecting 2 or 3 years ahead on, or even 6 months ahead on labor costs is a big F. So I think we're handicapping our procurement. The last thing I'll point out is that the procurement is separate from the city manager's office. In other words, there's an extra layer. There's 2 charters looking at the cost evaluation and so forth, and then that goes on to the treasurer's office. So it's not just in one department. And for that reason, believing that we have and we are accomplishing things, and the expectation of our businesses and stakeholders and everyone else, I believe, I support the main motion. The problem is that we will create more of a drag on Scottsdale, and I'm saying that not in a 100% way. It's not a complete drag, but it's a handicap when we don't need one, and everything is transparent. When we do consent agenda items, there may be a $2 million consent agenda item. The consent agenda items are not just under a certain amount, and they all have the backup file that we need to make it work. So the comment about perhaps retooling procurement and those issues, frankly, we have an excellent process that's proven and tested, and I have to support the main motion. It still requires all the step-by-step. No one's cheating the public. No one's keeping it. It's still available, and half the time, not more than half the time, out of $74 million, $72 million are already in that full range that would be covered in this action. So it can simplify things, and I believe it will make our project managers more agile, and they're all accountable according to the supervision. Being in the business of procurement and architecture and all that kind of thing, I just feel that we also want to buy local. And it is true that some smaller companies may not have the ability to throw $6 or $7 grand into a bid, right? And then say, wow, I just can't work in Scottsdale, and I live here and work here, because that threshold doesn't, if you have a $5,000 or $6,000 cost to make a bid for $30,000, it just blows you out of the water. Let's see, Councilwoman Caputi, Councilwoman Whitehead, and then Councilmember Graham. Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Well, I had a whole lot of things to say, but actually the mayor just basically said everything I wanted to say. I couldn't agree more. So that's exactly right. I mean, I think we are Scottsdale. We offer the best services, and this is the way we do it at the lowest cost. As someone who works in in the construction industry, it's very common for something to be $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 and to have a gigantic lead time. So, I mean, it's just one of those situations in which if you could speed up the procurement process, that does allow us to give better service to our citizens, and that's what we are famous for. As it's pointed out here, we're amending the purchasing thresholds within existing regulations, rules, and procedures. So again, I don't want to just repeat everything the mayor said, but we're not doing anything to decrease transparency. Nothing is changing in terms of if someone wants to look at a contract. We're simply changing the threshold that's required, which does make sense under current market conditions, which have completely changed. So again, I don't want to repeat everything the mayor said. He said it perfectly, and I do still support the initial motion. Thank you.
Councilwoman Whitehead, and then Councilmember Graham.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think this is a case where a soundbite can really sound bad, and then when you dig a little deeper, you realize the opposite might be true. So I agree with Councilwoman Littlefield in that these small contracts add up, and that's why it's imperative that we as a city council and as a city operate in a very streamlined way in order to make sure that none of these small contracts cost more than they should and take longer than they should, and add to our taxpayer burden. So if I understand correctly, and I don't want to repeat what our treasurer said, but she said it very effectively in that nothing changes other than the process, and the process impacts, if I understand it correctly, $2 million. $2 million of contracts, and yet creates an opportunity for over 130 vendors to apply and provide a really good estimate for, to bid on these contracts, on this work. So we have opened the doors to many more bidders at a reduced cost, at a time savings, at removed red tape, and absolutely not impacted any transparency. So I think many of us on this dais initially looked at this item and it was a red flag, but I really appreciate the additional discussion up here. And I also want to comment on Mr. Washington's his remarks, because no kidding, we all hate when there's sort of ill-defined, meaningless phrases. But I think as a government, we are our staff has to use some generic terms. So I do want to define market conditions as inflation. So with that, I appreciate the additional discussion. I certainly appreciate additional input from our treasurer and our purchasing staff. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting back to Councilmember Graham, but I do want to just clarify that we do have a motion for an alternate motion. We will be voting on that first, and then we will vote on the main motion if necessary. So, Councilmember Graham, and then I see Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I ask for the purchasing manager, if Sonia, if it's okay with you, can I ask a couple of questions? And I'll keep this very brief. I think part of the reflex for why we're just having this discussion is that In our packet, it says contracts exceeding the formal threshold will continue to require council approval per the code. So everything above, it says the formal threshold. So what would the new formal threshold under this change be?
The informal formal threshold per the proposal would be 100,000.
Okay, so below that, would council approve items below the 100,000 under this change?
According to the procurement code, it would not require to go to council. Formal contracts, so contracts over 100,000 that are professional services and or construction, are required to go to council. Other contracts, of course, can go before council for approval, but that's the one aspect that is addressed by the procurement code.
Okay, who decides whether it comes before council?
That would be the city manager as well as the city attorney.
Okay, so there would be contracts under 100,000 that don't have to come before council that do have to come before council now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that seems to contradict a little bit what we heard earlier. There will be contracts right now between 25 and 100,000 that must come before council that after this change would no longer, depending on whether a decision was made.
If there was a contract, for example, under the current thresholds that was over 25,000, so let's say $45,000, and it was a professional service. We wanted some consulting from, say, a physician. In that hypothetical situation, that would be required by the procurement code to go to council.
Okay.
If under the new thresholds, it was 100,000 would be the threshold. So in that particular case, it would not, by the procurement code, be required to go to council.
Okay.
I would like to clarify, though, that the procurement code is not the final determination of what then goes to council and what doesn't. For the contracts, when they approach me, when staff approaches the purchasing department, we advise them according to the procurement code. But if, for example, that physician was of a political nature, the contract could go before council for approval.
Okay. So you understand why it seems like there's been a contradiction, right?
I don't quite see the contradiction.
Well, when it said that there was nothing that was changing, but now it's changing in such a way that somebody makes a decision whether it comes before council if it's between those two thresholds. Correct? City Attorney, please.
Yeah, let me-
Yes.
yeah.
If I may.
Sure, I see.
Mayor and Councilmember Graham, you're correct in that the provision of the procurement code that the purchasing director was mentioning earlier provides, and let me just, it's short, so I'll just read it to the council.
Sure.
Provides that the city council shall award all contracts for construction and professional services exceeding the formal procurement limit set forth in the section that you're considering changing. So you are correct that if you change that informal limit, that for construction and professional service contracts, that limited basket of contracts, that the ones under 100,000 likely would not go to council for approval unless the city manager, city treasurer, somebody decided this is probably a contract that the city council should look at.
Okay.
So the council could decide to change the formal procurement limit to 100,000 for all of the reasons the city treasurer has discussed and the city manager has also discussed, and still ask that those contracts between $25,000 and $100,000 that are construction or professional services contracts still come to council for approval.
Okay.
That would be another option that the council had. But
Yeah, so I'm pretty, as I sit here, I'm pretty convinced that there's likely to be fewer contracts that are approved by city council if we make this change. Is that a fair statement?
I wouldn't know exactly how many contracts are coming before this council under the $100,000 limit.
Okay.
Because it's only the basket
Right.
of
Okay.
construction and professional services contracts.
Okay.
Yes, there are going to be fewer that
Okay.
come to council unless council directs otherwise.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you how many. I think the larger number of contracts
Okay.
are
that council sees under these two baskets are likely over $100,000. I'll let the purchasing director comment on that.
Yes, statistically, the number of contracts that go before council shouldn't change drastically. You're not going to see an almost absent consent agenda moving forward.
Right.
Statistically, we just don't do a lot of professional services and construction under 100,000 or between the dollar range of 25 to 100,000. So what you're seeing today on your consent agendas are generally, with maybe the exception of the $98,000 one, is generally over $100,000. It's just the nature of the market condition and the nature of the work.
We're belaboring this, so I think, Mr. Purchasing Director, I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry.
My name is Robert Sheppy.
Okay, I'm new around here, so thank you, Robert.
Welcome.
Thank you, Robert, very much. It's, I maintain that we are relinquishing some of our oversight and protections of residents, and the mayor, he spoke about agility, and agility is important, but you can lose some oversight with too much speed. So, Mr. Mayor, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I will keep my alternate motion on the floor to be voted on, but I do appreciate the opportunity for you allowing me to speak.
Sure, of course. And Councilwoman Janik, and then Councilwoman Whitehead, and then we will vote on the motions that are on the floor. Go, proceed, Councilwoman Janik.
I'm going to ask the treasurer. We have numbers for 25,000 and we have numbers for 100,000 as to how many bids there would be on a certain number of projects and what the value is. What is that number for 50,000? Is that available?
Mayor, Mayor, Councilmember Janet, yes. So for items that are 50,000 to 100,000, is that the one? Okay. So currently, if we make this switch, there'll be 76 items between 50,000 to 100,000 that totals a value of 1.7 million. So $1.7 million of the $74.6 million will shift to the three informal quote requirement. Excuse me. So that'll be 76 such items that are between, if you're looking at fiscal year 22.
Okay, so then is it valid to say that keeping it at 25,000, we had 213 solicitations, and if we go to 50,000 and up, we'd be at 158 solicitations? No, you said, I thought that was the difference between 25 and 100.
There's
How
also...
about 50 and up, rather than 50 to 100, don't limit it, 50 and up.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Janik. There's also items that currently are between 25,000 and 50,000. They're the small one-time purchases. So right now, under the threshold that we have 16 of those items at $153,000. If we make these changes, it will go to 55 items for $1.4 million. So it'll kind of shift items from the 213 up to the 50 to 100 and up to the 25 to 50, and some might even drop into the, so that's kind of what it would do. But overall, only about 2 million in purchases would be moved away from the formal solicitation process.
Can you say that one more time?
Based on the based on the fiscal year 22 numbers, which is probably a good representation of our annual bid process, only about 2.4 million would shift out of the formal solicitation process into either the informal proposal process or the quick quote process.
And what is the number? Rather than the 2.4 million, how many actual solicitations would that represent? Is that the 82?
131.
If that's
I have
useful.
to tell you, I'm very uncomfortable making a change this big, not having more information in front of me to make the decision. I understand the reason why you're asking, but I think maybe for me, I'm going to be voting on something where I don't have all the data. And Councilmember Graham, I think, brought up some very, very important points. And no offense to our city manager, I am very uncomfortable giving that power to one person. That power belongs to the council as representatives of the people. So I still support what I seconded.
Sure. And I'll just go to Councilwoman Whitehead if there's any reconsideration or discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. You know, we have two different motions, but I think we all have the same concerns. So I would actually like to amend my motion to simply require that all of these contracts come before council. So we're talking about $2 million worth of contracts, and the valid concern that Councilman Graham brought up is that there will be some contracts, if we make this decision, that no longer are on the consent agenda. So with that, and with any assistance from our execs team here, I would like to amend my motion to add that all contracts will continue to appear on the consent agenda. Okay, Attorney Sherry Scott?
Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead. Yes, City Attorney.
So this is an ordinance. The procurement code is in an ordinance. As we've already learned tonight, when you change one little section in the code, it has a domino effect, and that changes exactly the number of contracts that may be coming forward to council. Not every contract in the procurement code under the informal limit comes to council. What I'm hearing is council wants more information about that. I think when we start making too many complex amendments on the floor to how you may want your procurement code to look, we may end up with some unintended consequences. If I have the support of the city manager and the city treasurer, would recommend that we simply just pull this item, get a little more information together, and bring it forward to council in a way that makes the council hopefully more comfortable with what's being proposed.
Okay, I move to continue this item number 21. Do I have a second? Thank you. We have motion and a second. Any discussion? The continuance takes precedence over all other motions, so let's vote for the continuance or against the continuance of this item. Please register your vote. Thank you. That's unanimous. At this point, and as you can see, our council is very engaged in details, and that's a good thing. And at this point, we will move on from the with our regular agenda. At this point, we are published to open up public comment again, and we see that there's no comment from the public. So with that, I will close public comment. Next, we will move on to the opportunity for a citizen petition. We have seen none. None was posted at the clerk's office, so that matter will be closed. At this point, we will, I am open for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I see no other discussion. Please record your vote.
Come on. There you go.
We're working. It is unanimous. Thank you so much. Enjoy the evening.
All right.
It's a live fire exercise.
We're getting on it.
we still have a work-study session.
No, it's too late. It's too late.
we will resume the work study portion of our meeting as agendized. At this point, I do want to point out that our City Council is all present. The charter officers are present, and we are ready to proceed with the information from our city treasurer on the year-end financial report for 2021-2022. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. This presentation is our year-end financial report for fiscal year 22. Next slide. Our fiscal year 22 ended on June 30th. It takes a couple months to perform all the year-end closings to produce preliminary results. And so we presented those preliminary results for the general fund to Council on August 26th. It then takes another 3 months to go through the audit process and complete the year-end report. The audit was completed on October 26th and presented to the audit committee in November. On December 26th, the auditors presented their audit report to Council, and tonight's presentation is the last step in our year-end process. Next slide. Before I begin, I want to mention that our fiscal year 22 report has been submitted to the GFOA for the Excellence in Financial Reporting Award. Like Mayor mentioned earlier, this is the 50th consecutive year that we have submitted for this award. It is a milestone that we are incredibly proud of, and I'd like to recognize and thank our accounting director, Anna Henthorn, our accounting managers, Sarah Delgado and Chris Downey, they're here in the audience, and the accounting team for this accomplishment, which comes with much hard work and dedication. Next slide. So I will be highlighting numbers from our year-end report and also helping you understand what it says about the city's financial health. The audited annual financial report is a very important document. Aside from being the city's official audited financial statements, it provides a lot of detailed information about the city's finances, and it is used by our bond rating agencies, lenders, and investors to assess our financial health. Next slide. In order to understand what the financial report is saying about the city's financial health, we look at 3 areas. First, we look at financial condition. Do our revenues cover expenditures to maintain our service levels? Are we spending within our means? Do we have strong cash balances and liquidity to pay our bills, or do we have cash flow problems? Is our balance sheet strong? We look at financial capacity. Do we have a manageable debt burden, long-term liabilities, or are we over-leveraged? Do we have the ability to finance and fund our capital needs without shifting that burden to the future? And finally, we look at financial resiliency. Do we have sufficient and adequate reserves and budget flexibility to handle economic downturns and unforeseen events without straining our finances and having to use our operating money? Our year-end report for fiscal year 22, I'm happy to report, shows that the city of Scottsdale is financially healthy and strong. And let me go over some numbers to show that. Next slide. So first of all, financial condition. For fiscal year 22, our operating revenues adequately covered our operating expenditures across pretty much all funds. Let's take a look at the general fund first. Next slide. So the general fund is our primary operating fund. We collected $37.6 million, or 26% more in sales tax than we expected. Sales tax is the largest source of revenues in the general fund. Now, as I've discussed earlier in previous presentation, we can't get too excited about this because the excess tax collection is due to the federal government's stimulus actions that supercharged the economy, creating what we call the pandemic spending spree. And this is not unique to Scottsdale. It is happening across all cities in the nation, and then you add inflation that drives up the prices. Most cities are experiencing excess tax collections like us. So we do not expect this to continue each year, and we look at these excesses as one-time revenues. However, we did get that in fiscal year 22. We also received $14.6 million from the American Rescue Plan Act. Those are the stimulus funds allocated to us, which we use for some public safety expenditures, and that allowed us to free up some of our general fund dollars for other one-time needs. On the expenditure side in the general fund, we made a one-time $40 million additional payment to pay down our public safety pension liability. Without that $40 million, our general fund operating expense is actually less than the $300 million you see there. Okay, next slide. The next group of funds are our other governmental funds. Those are our dedicated revenue funds, where the revenues are either legally restricted by state statute or by voter approval. Next slide. Let's look at those. These are our major categories of other governmental funds. We have a lot of smaller other governmental funds, but these are our major categories. With all of these funds, our transportation tax fund, preserve tax fund, tourism fund, and our geo bond debt service fund, we saw positive revenue growth, and our revenues adequately covered expenditures. Now, I wanted to make a comment on the preserve tax fund, which is the two bars in the second column. The preserve taxes collected are used for debt service. We typically do not see such a large excess of revenues over expenditures. Only during the last 2 years with this pandemic spending spree did we see such an excess. If we go into a recession, the preserved tax revenues may dip below the expenditures. And unlike our transportation tax fund and our tourism fund, where we can reduce expenditures in response to reduced revenues, in the preserve tax fund, the expenditures are fixed debt service, where we won't be able to reduce expenditures in response. So we maintain reserves to ensure that we have enough tax collections to pay our debt. So when we have years of excess like that in the preserve tax fund, we typically put those in reserves to ensure future years we can cover our debt service. Next slide. The last group of funds is our enterprise funds, and these are our business-type operations that are 100% fee-supported. They do not rely on the general fund. They're not subsidized by tax dollars or general fund. Next slide. Now, these are our enterprise operations, and this slide shows the net operating income, or actually loss, in the sewer fund, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. For fiscal year 22, we had positive net operating income in all our funds except the sewer fund. Operating income is operating revenues minus operating expenses, which includes depreciation expense. So for the sewer fund, what this is telling us is that our sewer rates are generating enough revenues to cover out-of-pocket expenses. We're able to pay our bills to maintain our system, but it is not sufficient to cover depreciation expense, which is the rate at which our assets are depreciating and eventually needing to be replaced. We are working on our utility rate adjustments right now for next fiscal year, and we will make sure that our proposed rates that we bring forward to council will cover not only just our out-of-pocket expense, but also future replacement for our capital assets as well. But otherwise, our water fund is healthy with an 18% operating margin. Our solid waste and airport funds are also healthy with positive operating margins. Next slide. Now on to our balance sheet. Our balance sheet for fiscal year 22 is strong, and we also improved our balance sheet a little bit. On the short-term assets, mostly cash, we increased that from $1.3 billion to $1.4 billion, mostly due to the excess sales tax collections. Next is our long-term assets. There are capital assets that increased by $100 million from $6.1 billion to $6.2 billion. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Our liabilities decreased by $200 million to $1.5 billion. So overall, we improved our net position, which is like our equity, by about $300 million. So capital assets and investment in our infrastructure is the largest asset and component of our balance sheet, $6.2 billion in net book value of capital assets. Next slide. 56% of that net book value of our capital assets is in the land that we own. Most of it is our open space, which is our preserve, and also our street right away. And net book value is not market value. Net book value is original cost or donated value. We don't depreciate land. So as you can see, we have an incredibly priceless, valuable asset in the land that we own and the open space that we have. The other large categories of assets is our water and sewer systems and our street and storm drain systems. Our buildings and other assets are not as significant. Next slide. On to our liabilities. Our main long-term liabilities are our pension liabilities and our debt. With our pension liabilities, that actually decreased by $112 million last year, from $421.6 million to $309.6 million, mainly due to the strong investment earnings in those plans in 2021. ASRS is the retirement plan for our non-public safety employees, and PSPRS is the public safety retirement plan. Now, these PSPRS numbers, the decrease you see here, does not reflect the $40 million extra payment we made. So we actually expect the liability to go down even further once that extra payment is factored into the actuarial calculations. So what this really shows you is that with a good investment year and good investment return, the pension liabilities can actually go down quite a bit. But on the flip side, if there's a bad investment year and negative returns, that could really increase our pension liabilities. Next slide. Debt is our other long-term liability. We maintain a very manageable debt profile with $832 million outstanding at June 30, 2022. Our largest debt outstanding are our preserved debt and our water sewer debt. Preserved debt, as you know, is repaid from the preserved taxes. Water sewer debt is repaid from water sewer rates. So our two largest debt balances do not rely on the general fund. As you can see, we have only issued $48 million in the bond 2019 debt. We haven't issued the whole $319 million yet. We issue that as we go along in terms of how we construct the projects. We will be issuing more bond 2019 and water sewer debt this year. Next slide. And this slide just shows you how much the significant capacity we have available to us to issue more geodebt if needed. The state statute limits the geodebt that we can issue. Under the 6% statutory limit, we still have $519 million more of capacity. Under the 20% statutory limit, we have $1.3 billion in capacity. We have plenty of capacity to issue debt without having to shift burden to the future. And all this debt, if we have to issue it, requires voter approval. We cannot just go out and issue it without voter approval. Next slide. So we talked about financial condition, our revenues covering expenditures, our strong balance sheet, and financial capacity, our debt, manageable debt. And the final thing is financial resiliency, which is the third indicator of our financial health. Financial resiliency is having enough reserves and budget flexibility to respond to economic downturns and unexpected events. And as we talked about, as you know, we increased our policy reserves last year. So I'm happy to report that at June 30 of 2022, we met our new policy reserves as shown on this slide. In our general fund with our stabilization emergency reserves, we have $83.2 million. That might sound like a very large number, but that's only 25% or 3 months of our operating expenses. In water and sewer, we have $67.2 million in reserves. That's also 3 months of operating expenses plus 2% of asset book value. That's because of the incredibly valuable assets in our water and sewer system that we have to protect and ensure we have the money to respond to any emergencies. We have $46.1 million in debt service reserves and $7 million in other operating reserves. Next slide. And this is my final slide. Finally, we maintained our AAA bond rating throughout fiscal year 22. A AAA bond rating is the highest rating that we can achieve. Rating agencies look for economic and revenue growth. They look for strong balance sheet. They look for manageable debt and long-term liabilities, and they also look for strong financial management policies and practices. So I want to comment that the city's financial strength is not something that was achieved overnight, but rather through years of consistent and outstanding financial and budget management by council and staff. So thank you, council, for your strong financial leadership. And so to conclude, our fiscal year 22 report shows that the city is in strong financial position heading into 2023 and 2024. However, as the city treasurer, I must say that as we head into 23-24, we will be dealing with cost increases, inflation, reduced consumer spending, and probably a recession, labor market challenges, and whatever challenges we have. At least we're starting off in a financially strong position, and we believe that we can manage through the financial challenges we will be facing moving forward. So thank you, and I can answer any questions that you have.
Well, thank you very much, and let's proceed, Councilwoman Whitehead.
You know, I just want to thank our city treasurer and all of our team. This has been, that was a really big change, and it was one that you initiated, these reserves, and I'm just really pleased with the financial position we're in, so thank you.
Councilmember Graham.
Sonia, thank you very much for the presentation. I would put some questions up in the next slide. I would cross them all out because you answered them. For our annual audit, we got a management letter, is that right? Were there any comments for material weaknesses?
Mayor, Councilmember Graham, I'm going to ask our accounting director because I don't remember. There was nothing of significant substance, but I think there was some comments on that, so I'll have her respond. Thank you.
Hi there, Anna Henther, the accounting director. The comment that we received was related to our purchasing card controls. There was some deficiencies in the oversight.
Can you say a little more about that, Anna?
Yeah, so there was, of the samples that they selected, they did not have the appropriate approvals from the supervisors to authorize those pro cards. They were not done timely.
So the approvals happened, but not early enough?
Correct.
Okay, but they did happen at some point by the appropriate person?
That is correct.
Okay. Was that considered a material weakness or a significant deficiency?
That was considered, it was not, can you remind me how that was written? Significant deficiency. There was no issues with the financial statements. It was just on the internal controls.
Internal control.
Yeah.
In those management letters, there's also other comments that they don't have to include in the management letter, but you can talk about them with management. Were there any other comments that they brought up that they weren't included in the management letter?
Okay. Just a moment, sorry.
I apologize if you weren't totally ready for that.
That's okay. Sorry, this is a large packet.
Maybe you could send it to us if you can't find it.
Yeah, we did provide this in the December meeting where the audit results were provided. So yes, we definitely can.
Yeah. Well, this wouldn't actually probably be in that. It would be more verbal communications and other comments for like improvements for operations and internal controls.
Usually they provided all of that, but I'll definitely make sure that we provide the management letter to you.
Well, the management letter and the additional comments.
Yes.
Okay. Anna, you can send it to the full council and mayor?
Absolutely.
Okay. Couple more questions. Sonia, how many weeks, and thank you, Anna, how many weeks of operating expenses do you like to have of cash on hand?
Mayor, Councilmember Graham, so it's a little bit complicated question. We have about $800 million in cash, and we have our operating needs vary depending on our debt payments, and so we have cash flow projections that we work with our investment advisor to ensure our liquidity and availability to meet debt service and operating requirements are in our short-term portfolio, and then we have long-term portfolio where we invest the cash more long-term.
Okay, I was just curious. There's no magic answer, but I was interested in your philosophy, and I'll sit down with you more and talk about that. Because
Yeah.
I know that if we have too much cash sitting around, it's not getting to work for us. We're not getting a return for taxpayers, but it's very, very basic, isn't it? And then, go ahead.
Yeah, so there is not a magic number. We don't have a policy where we say we are going to maintain X amount of cash in terms of, our cash management. There is a lot of cash required for operations that we maintain, and it's the whole cash management program that we have ensures that we have the liquidity and the
I'm not concerned with liquidity, with sufficient liquidity. I'm just concerned maybe there's too much liquidity. If we could put some, making sure it's still working, just kind of your philosophy about cash management. But we don't have to talk more about that. My other last question, that'll be the end of it. I promise, Mayor. Is you said we have $2.7 billion of depreciable assets.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
The question, we have $2.7 billion of depreciable assets. Do you have a percentage or a benchmark that you think we should be investing in our fixed assets to make sure we don't have a structural deficit? It's okay. It's okay if you, we can talk about it more. It's just some questions that came to mind.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. It's okay.
Okay, so our capital asset, each of our capital asset programs have studies that we do. So, for example, with our water and sewer program, through our rate study, the rate study incorporates the needed investment in those capital assets. The impact fee studies and the master plans and all those studies that we do, that's how we determine how much we need to invest in those assets to maintain those assets. And they're all interconnected in how we set our rates and how we determine the finances for the city.
Very good. Well, thank you for indulging me, and we'll talk more about it when we have our meetings, and we'll share with the rest of the council. And Anna, thank you. Appreciate you for coming to the podium and answering my questions. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for allowing me to ask those questions.
Excellent. I just have two comments. First of all, the refinancing of certain notes and so forth is authorized by the council every step of the way, and I think we let you test the market in this coming quarter. Secondly, the financial advisors and, as I understand it, two sort of like checkbook and then investment group, that is expiring with Wells Fargo and a subsidiary spinoff of them. So we'll have a chance to rebid that and see where the performance or lack of has been there, and then we can, it tends to be a pretty solid relationship, and there are several that can meet those kinds of fiduciary, I want to say not strength, but just to be able to be value partners with the city. So that's, so to speak, the checkbook, and just like the CDs that we tend to manage in our own life, right? Especially with growing kids, that's got to be working for you.
I think this council, though, or this city has like an 850 credit score.
Yeah,
we're close to it, right?
We're doing very well. With that, I don't see any other hands up. I look forward as we move forward, and this is the only work study item. With that, I would request for a motion to adjourn our work study.
Move to adjourn?
And I heard a second from Mr. Graham. Oh.
Second.
Yes, good. Let's accordingly, please record your vote. We are adjourned. Good evening, everyone.